Basically, today's title is Save Puran Dhaka, a campaign for protection of urban heritage of Puran Dhaka. We started this campaign back in 2004 when a building collapsed in Shakhari Bazar, and the city government at the time, they decided to demolish all the old buildings in that neighborhood. I'm talking about Shakhari Bazar. One building collapsed, and then they decided to demolish all the old buildings there. And as usual, they were using some political rhetorics. They were saying that they're going to demolish all these buildings and then they will construct high-rise buildings. They will make Shakhari Bazar look like a mini Singapore or whatnot. It was quite obvious that this government project had to be stopped. But then again, it was also politically not correct to talk about heritage at that time, because during what happened, the building that collapsed, it also caused deaths to about 19 people. So it was quite a very seriously tragic incident. And in fact, in an urban disaster of this scale, this was probably the first time we experienced something like this. And the campaign started, initially we used to call it Save Shakhari Bazar. And then after 2-3 years, gradually the scope of the campaign also expanded, and then we moved on to Save Puran Dhaka. After we started our campaign in 2004, within 2-3 years, we realized there were many other buildings which needed documentation. And in those days, there was only one heritage list. It belonged to the archaeological department, and only 35 or 34 buildings sites were included in that list. Or a couple of years later, around 2007 or 8, we started doing extensive surveys of Puran Dhaka, and gradually by 2009, we have come up with about 3,000 buildings, a list of 3,000 buildings. Today, quite a few buildings have been lost over the last 10, 12 years. So we did this survey, and about 2,500 buildings were included, identified. And in this map, we are showing those buildings. But what we have done also, we have divided these whole groups into 5-6 smaller groups. So Lal Bagh group, Chowk Bazar group, Kotwali group, Monogram Moishundi group, or we could Monogram Wari group, and Shutrapur Farajganj group. Then there is another one called Ganderia group. In each of these groups, especially Monogram group, Kotwali group, and Shutrapur group, we have roughly about 450 buildings in each of these groups. This is where a question arises, or a lot of people have been asking us about these questions. In fact, in the writ petitions that we have filed, or the people who have appealed against the writ petitions or the High Court judgment, a lot of people are claiming that these are not, this has not been done properly. And of course, there are some government quarters also who support that idea. So in today's presentation, I'm going to focus on a small area, almost 50% of Shutrapur areas. It covers only this part. So the area below, we have somewhere here Paridash Road, and then BK Dash Road, and Revati Mohan Dash Road, the area that covered this area only. When you go through the main thoroughfares, you hardly see any buildings, any heritage buildings. But as you move on, as you walk through these secondary roads or tertiary roads or access roads, that's when these neighborhoods come alive. That's a unique part of Puran Dhaka, the mohallas of Puran Dhaka. Largely, the layout of the Mughal era, it's still there. And And then during the urban revival that took place in mid-19th century, the colonial period buildings were constructed. And in many cases, the Mughal era buildings, or the footprint or the ground floors of the Mughal era buildings has remained there. And then there were modifications and changes or extensions on those buildings. So I often like to say that the city has a Mughal skeleton uh, and colonial period fresh on the city. That's what we see today. And these narrow lanes and bylanes from Mughal Dhaka, they're still there. And this is where, unless you go there, you don't see the actual charm or beauty of Puran Dhaka. We know Ruplal House, everyone knows Ruplal House, and then there is Mongolabash, and then these neighborhoods, the Mahallas, very narrow streets. This is Kotwali again. I think we could just skip some. Shop Bazaar Group, Armani Tola. Once again, you'll have to walk through Bacharam Diori, Mahot Tuli, Armani Tola, and those beautiful neoclassical structures, architectures can be seen. And Chowk Bazaar, Boro Katra, Choto Katra, even Boro Katra. You won't see it from main Chowk Bazaar area. You will have to walk through these narrow lanes to reach this main gate of Boro Katra. Then the historic waterfront. We have Ruplal House on the waterfront, and Asan Manzil and Boro Katra, Choto Katra all used to be on the waterfront, not anymore. So these are the groups. We have already mentioned the groups, and basically what we have done is that according to the ward, the administrative districts, wards, we have identified these groups in these different groups. Of course, there's another relationship here. These are all under Thana, the police station, under the jurisdiction of each police station. These are also very important for the governance part, because for our campaign to implement the whatever legal development that takes place, we have to take the help of the local police station, because there are a lot of people who are trying to get these old buildings demolished at the earliest possible chance they get. Vested properties, you know about the vested properties, the properties which were left behind by the Hindu owners. That's another part of Dhaka I forgot to mention. Partition of India, India and Pakistan in 47. There were riots all over the subcontinent, but the major riots that took place in Bangladesh or then East Pakistan, it took place in 1950 and later on in 1964. And during those riots, actually, a lot of people, the Hindu community, they left behind their properties here in Dhaka and left for India. While from India, especially Kolkata and West Bengal, or the eastern half of India, a lot of people migrated to East Pakistan, East Bengal. And these properties, initially they were 1965, there was a war between India and Pakistan. So they were known as enemy properties. Even today in India, they're known as enemy properties. The properties, Muslim properties, which were left behind by them. But in Bangladesh, after 1971, our independence war, we have given them a new name. We call them vested properties. So these vested properties, they're practically, the government has the responsibility of managing these properties. The maintenance and upkeep is supposed to be done by the government, but unfortunately, over the last 70 years, I don't think any government agencies paid a single taka for any of these buildings. The owners or the present residents, it's up to them, the leaseholders, it's up to them to do the maintenance and repair work. The reason I'm showing these vested properties is that today, when we do this heritage list, we were doing this heritage list, we found out that there are many buildings which are simultaneously vested properties and which could be identified as heritage properties. And this is where the government could be the first step towards preserving the old town, because these buildings, they need repair and maintenance work, and if the government can start the restoration work here, things can can be, this could provide a jumpstart to the whole process of conservation, which has been waiting for the last 20 years. I'm going to highlight one particular area. This is, as I said, part of Shutrapur Forest Belt. There are a lot of very beautiful, interesting structures in this area. Ruplal House, Dev Niwas, Borobari, Revati Mohandas Residence. And these are the buildings that we have identified within that area. It's a very small area, but then again, you can see a lot of old buildings there, and these are groups of buildings. This is the most important part about in our finding, is that the groups of buildings, these are not just random one building here or there. We have a whole collection of buildings in different areas in this part, and which deserves to be protected, and not just one group. Instead of just one group, this whole area should be protected because we have this group. And then there has been some development. The multi-story buildings have been constructed. Just to show the kind of buildings or sites we have over there, one by one, I'm going to just cover a few of these areas. So first of all, going back, this is beauty boarding area. Beauty boarding, and then behind beauty boarding, we have this beautiful temple, Ananda Margo, Pran Vallabh Jum temple. And then, of course, we have this beautiful structure that almost like a caravanserai or Borokatra, Chotokatra. It has an accessway through the building. This was, the whole structure used to belong to this Hindu zamindar called Sri Chandra Das. And beauty boarding, we know beauty boarding back in 90s, after the zamindar left for India, this was converted into some kind of boarding or some kind of a motel. They also provide lunch and breakfast over here. They have a very nice restaurant. But most importantly, this became a place where in 1960s, the upcoming intellectuals would come together and they would be hanging out there. Then the Adda is as a common term here. It was almost like the coffee shops in Paris or Kolkata. There are similar places. This is where all the creative people, young people, they would be getting together, and they had these intellectual discussions and all that. Most of them went on to become very important leaders in our cultural field, literature field, filmmakers, painters, novel writers and all, poets. So we have beauty boarding, we have this Ananda Margo temple, this residence here belonging to Sri Chandra Das, and there's another residence on this part, Harishchandra Das Lane. Then there's this, just behind Big Bob Forestganj, there's this beautiful small little neighborhood. Hardly anyone knows this name, and there's another important thing, that very little history is known about many of these not so important historical figures. Modern Shah, he probably paid for the electrification or paid some money to the municipality. That was a common practice. You pay some money to the municipality and there you could have a street named after yourself or your parents or father. Back in those days, it was quite common. So this is the beautiful street. It's still there, as you can see in this perspective model. We did this 3D models. Hopefully in a couple of months' time, we'll be able to finish everything. We would like to show you how this whole area could look like, why that itself could be an incentive for preserving, protecting these areas. Moving on, we have Revati Mohandas residence on the eastern side of this block, adjacent to Revati Mohandas. So we have a group of buildings, and then the main mansion of Revati Mohandas, the palatial building. Here, there's this other interesting structure. It's Mohini Mohandas Lane. Once again, as you can see, everything is happening within this small area. Here is this cluster of buildings around Mongol Abash, the building that I have shown a few minutes back. The same within the same group. And then we have Ruplal House. But it's not just Ruplal House. Next to Ruplal House, we have this another special group. It's Panchbari. It's known as Panchbari, five families. And they all belong to the same group, but five residences all together. It's a beautiful cluster of buildings and with adjoining courtyards. It's an amazing collection of buildings. And then we have this temple also. Unfortunately, very recently, the temple has been, there did some repair job. This is a beautiful collection of buildings of Bukit and Fumaba. Lokinaran Jew Temple, that's a very special structure, one of the largest temples in this part of Dhaka. In some part of this building, this particular structure, the structure itself has become a little vulnerable. So there has been a lot of, at different times, they have been trying to get a permission from the government to demolish the whole building, get rid of the whole building and build something new. But this has been also listed by even by the government. So hopefully this building will be there. Just a few renders. Borobari, streetscape of Bikadashwar. Very quickly, I'll run through some of the challenges that we are facing over there. Most importantly, from the government side, it has become something like a vendetta against the heritage properties. Either buildings are getting demolished, very special building. We all know about Khamarbari. And then very recently, there was another building by moving on, let's say Jahajbari. Jahajbari in Chowk Bazar, it was demolished by a sitting MP. And this was not even his property. He claimed this was his property. And then this was actually a Waqf property, a religiously endowed property. And he somehow managed to grab the permission, get the permission to demolish this building. And it all happened on the night before Eid. The 40, 50 of his Muslims, they just cordoned off the whole area. It was like curfew in that area, and then a bulldozer was brought in, demolished the whole structure. This is another building that we have lost in the recent past. In 2015, in Shakhari Bazar, this building was demolished. Once again, the locals, some of the locals, under the leadership of the local politician, a political leader. And very recently, during the Corona period, this building was demolished. It belonged to Nicholas Pogod, the famous Pogod School in Puran Dhaka. It was established by Nicholas Pogod. This building was known as Neki Sahib Ki Koti, the residence of Neki Sahib. And there was a court order, direct court injunction on this building when they first started the demolition. With the help of the local volunteers, we did some demonstration. Then there was some extensive news media coverage on the demonstration. On the following day, our lawyer took it to the reports to the High Court, and the judge issued a suo motu order for the protection of this building. Unfortunately, during this Corona period, the group that owns the property now, they demolished it. They're saying that because the government very recently changed the heritage list again, and this building is not in that heritage list, they have demolished the building. But actually, now that we have this High Court protection that is valid from 2017, this was definitely a direct violation. This is a very important building. In 2017, they were demolishing this building. So there was again a protest, a demonstration by the volunteers, and eventually we filed a writ petition once again. And this is where we got, after so many writ petitions, about a dozen writ petitions that we have filed at different times. We also submitted a list of heritage buildings, about 2,200 buildings. to the government, and now the High Court decided to give protection for this building, for all the 2,200 buildings that we have listed. So what's happening in Puran Dhaka is that this is Boro Katra, one of the most important heritage buildings we have in the old town. And the madrasa that has the possession of this part of the monument, they decided to do the repair work by themselves. So basically they were putting up glaze tiles over there. This is Choto Katra, right in front of Choto Katra. You know, we have this building construction rules by Raju, which says that around 250 meters of this heritage monuments or heritage sites, the area is supposed to be considered as buffer zone. Anything that we build there, construct there, we have to make sure that it doesn't in any way obscure or cause any kind of obstruction for the monument itself. But here we can see not even 2.5 inches. Part of the rest of the structure is being supported by the wall of the monument itself. And from the roof of Choto Katra, you can see the encroachment all around the monument. This is, they're keeping a cow, they made it a cow shed right in front of the Choto Katra main gate on the roof of the 4-story building that has been constructed there. And here is another site. This is Bhawal Raja's residence. In the old days, most of these, I mean, they would have at least a residence in the city. They had to come to the city to, you know, there were a lot of litigations taking place in those days, and they would be staying here. It was known as Bhawal House. I have seen in the legal documents, it's referred to as Bhawal House. There was a very important development in 2012 when the government decided to demolish the district council building. The district council building, you know, that's the nursery of democratic practice in the city. In Bengal, as in Dhaka city, basically, around 1880s, the first municipality was of 1870s, I guess. Municipality was formed. They used to sit here, and this district council building, they decided to get rid of it. We have this monstrous multi-story building built over there, totally out of proportion. It looks like something totally alien to the area. This monstrous structure. But not only that, you can see this beautiful building just behind the main road. It's there, and it looks like the structure is sitting on the roof of this building. These are some things that should be taken into account when we form the guideline of how the buildings should be constructed, or of the kind of height should be allowed in Old Dhaka, in Puran Dhaka. This is another site, Nawab Bari Gate House. Just part of it was illegally demolished, and they constructed this 12-story building over there. It's not just demolition of the old buildings. Simultaneously, what happens is that, let me go to this slide first. I mentioned in 2006, the deed and mayor announced that in the buildings in Shakhari Bazar, they are their ancestral homes. They could just repair the buildings and they could continue to live in those houses. And this is what the owner or the person, family that had the possession of this building, this is what they did to the facade of the building. You can see all these beautiful, this is definitely a Mughal era building. And the plaster, all the ornamentation, decoration, they stripped it off. And this is what we have now. And recently there was an attempt to demolish this building also. Once again, with the help of the volunteers, we had to go through some legal process to get the protection of this building. This slide, this is a group of buildings from Shakhari Bazar. On the top, you can see the 4 buildings there. This is how it used to look like just a few years back. Then after 2015, they decided to, cover up the facade, the balcony. got rid of all the ornamentation. In 2015, Sikh holding number 64 was demolished. In spite of the legal protection it was supposed to enjoy, archaeological department decided not to do anything about it. This is a beautiful neighborhood from another area, very close to Sutrapur area. It's in Ganderia. This beautiful building was also demolished. Shankhanidhi is in Rankin Street area in Tipu Sultan Road. The 100-year-old temple. Just these are examples of how low can people go. This is a 100-year-old, 150-year-old, 20-year-old structure, a temple. Lal Mohan Shah's Thakurbari Radha Krishna temple, also known as Shankhanidhi. It used to belong to a family known as Shankhanidhi family. The main chamber was demolished. You can see part of the facade, very ornately decorated facade. In fact, it had a lot of similarity with the Muktagacha Rajbari. Those who are familiar with the Rajbari in Muktagacha or Jadavpur Rajbari, you can see some similarities too. But this part was the main chamber part was demolished. The owner of the adjacent property was claiming the ownership of this part, and the deputy commissioner DC office decided to hand over this part to that gentleman. That's when we had to take legal action, and finally, about a couple of months back, we got the High Court order that this building has to be protected and restored as an antiquity. There are some, even these beautiful neighborhoods. I mentioned the beauty of Puran Dhaka is this mohallas, beautiful neighborhoods, very narrow islands, and we had something like this about a year back. These two buildings were demolished on this site. The legal option is you go to the court and try to stop it. That's the only option left. DC Council building I've already mentioned. It was getting demolished in 2012-11, then in 12, and then we filed a writ petition. This is where a major development took place. The court ordered the government to complete the list of heritage buildings and submit it to the court within 3 months. That didn't happen, but at least that was a step in the positive direction. In 2009, we had a heritage list formed by the government, prepared by the government with the help of all the different groups involved in heritage conservation. So this is a major challenge for the archaeological department. They will have to, and there are certain legal framework under which this assessment has to be done. Very complex process. So it's going to take time, and hopefully in the meantime, we will be able to generate enough support for the preservation of the historic properties, and all the buildings that we have listed will be protected. In the meantime, the owners of the said list, USG list, buildings are directed not to alter, modify its structures from the present situation. It sounds so beautiful, but unfortunately, in quite a few places, they tried to demolish the old buildings. And in some cases, we have managed to stop the demolition with the help of local police station or Raju, but basically local police station. Or even we had to go to the court. That was from 2012. But this is a steady progress. This was Brahmo Samaj building, but in front of Brahmo Samaj building, we have this Raja Ram Mohan Roy Library building. You'll be surprised. A special committee was formed. There were 8 architects involved in that committee, and they decided to give permission for the demolition of this building. This is a very old library building. It's some very historical structure too, because of its historic connection with Brahmo Samaj, the Reformation movement among the Hindu community. That's when the Brahmo Samaj Brahmo Samaj building was established, and then the court has ordered the government to, it says, according to the 19 Antiquities Act, this building should be restored as an antiquity, preserved and protected as an antiquity. Okay, now the question, it does sound very nice that we have all the protection, but the next step, I'll try to give you a brief outline on that one. The question is, for the private property owners, what do you do about them? Because when you have an old building, someone lives in an old building, 2 or 3-story building, someone living in Shakari Bazaar for that matter, most of our work was done there. In Shakari Bazaar, someone living in a 2-3-story building, what does he do? I mean, he's not allowed to demolish that building. He can't, it would easily make it a 5 or 6-story building and then get enough financial benefit out from the building, sell part of the building or get rent from it. You know, we all need financial support from various at some point. And since this heritage protection designation is restricted them from demolishing these buildings, we have to come up with an alternative system through which we can provide some financial compensation for them. This is where the TDR becomes very important. This particular tool, this is a market-based planning tool, which allows the owner of a historic property to sell his development right to another property owner. And he is going to sell this right to this gentleman while he maintains the ownership of this property. The original owner, he retains the ownership of the property while just selling this development right to another person. And this other gentleman who is buying this right, he will be allowed to construct beyond whatever he is originally entitled to build. So another few, I mean, whatever this gentleman is selling, the extra square feet will be, a floor area would be added to this building. That's the main concept. This was developed in United States. They call it air right. And even in India, in many cities, they have used it. Mumbai, for example, they have used it. You can easily protect these heritage areas that we have been talking about. But at the same time, the property owners can be compensated. Once again, as you can see, it can be transferred from this old building. It's being transferred over there. Sending area, from the sending area, the development right is transferred to wherever the government decides to go for higher development. And this is how dollars come back to the sending area. We have some slides too, just 1 or 2 slides from other areas. Tati Bazaar, this is an image of Tati Bazaar, how it could look like if it's restored properly. And it's quite obvious. All you have to do, just restore these buildings which are already there, don't have to add anything. And then these spaces, you come up with this 2 things. We just want 2 things. Number 1, hospitality industry should be allowed to flourish in Puran Dhaka with this kind of atmosphere and space. Definitely for tourism, this could be a very hot destination, but at the same time, we have to ensure that it's not only about tourism, cultural activities. If we can bring all these 3 together, restore buildings, the historic property, preserve historic properties, bring in tourism, and also simultaneously we can have cultural activities over there. Puran Dhaka could become a hub for cultural activities. We know Bafa back in 1950s, 60s, that was the center of cultural activities. Before that, during the colonial period, we know Asan Manzil, we know Ruplal House, how special they were. Golda Garden, they were all cultural hubs. This is just another slide from Shakari Bazaar. We still believe we can do it. It's just a question of working out some of the problems that we have to take care of.